Tori, Laverne had timed everything to the minute. The Saturday noon tide would slip under the stilted floorboards of St. Helena Chapel, the island's sunlight would slant through its oyster-shell windows at exactly 58 degrees, and the small congregation of 40, family, college roommates, and a smattering of local officials who owed her favors, would watch veterinarian Chester Bryce tie the neatest, most predictable knot Savannah society had seen in a decade. By 11:42 a.m. she was laced into a tea-length ivory gown, her bare shoulders powdered against the humid low-country air. Beneath the bustle hid a pair of battered Converse high tops, she'd insisted on them the way some brides insist on heirloom pearls. Practical feat for a woman who spent weekdays in hard hats directing waterfront revitalization crews. The chapel's anteroom smelled of waxed cypress and starch. Her mother, Magnolia Garden steeped Grace until stress unstitched it, fastened a circle of gardenias into Tori's copper braid. "You sure the tide chart's right, baby? The marsh looks high already." "Mom, the tide chart's a NOAA file." "Trust the math," Tori answered, but her gaze slid to the arched doorway. No sound of groomsmen laughter drifted from the nave. That was odd. Chester's best man, college pal Hank, had a laugh that bounced like a coonhound in a tin washpot. At 11:49 the florist knocked, white as the lilies she carried. "Miss Laverne, I just got a call from the animal clinic. Dr. Bryce had an emergency, bloodhound with gastric torsion," he said. "He's on the mainland. Says he'll text." The sentence lodged like a fishbone. A torsion call on a wedding morning? "He has 3 associates," Tori said, but the florist only fluttered. Tori's maid of honor, Darcy, fished for her phone, no signal inside the cypress walls. She slipped out to the lawn, climbing a pew bench to snag a bar. When she returned, her face was the florist's twin. Text message, delivered 11:53 a.m., "Something's wrong. I can't do this. I'm sorry, cheese." 14 words. No punctuation after sorry. Silence filled the anteroom the way storm surge fills a tidal creek, fast, cold, leaving no footing. Tori inhaled the scent of crushed gardenias and felt the corset stays dig as though they were welding her upright. "Call Hank," she ordered. Darcy dialed. No answer. Second dial. Voicemail. From the nave the organist launched into a nervous arpeggio then choked it off. Through a cracked shutter Tori saw guests glancing back toward the doors, confusion eddying. In the second pew sat Silas Wayne, black suit, hurricane eye stillness, CEO of Wayne Futures, global urban infrastructure conglomerate, and her newest client. He'd flown from Manhattan because she'd once saved his company $200 million by rerouting a South Carolina light rail spur. They'd spoken 3 times in person, each conversation crisp as starched linen. She ought to have felt comforted by the presence of a friend powerful enough to yank a project's funding in or out like a breaker switch. Instead she felt as if the chapel were tilting on its pilings. Magnolia Laverne made a small wounded bird noise. "We can delay an hour." "There's no hour," Tori said, voice flat with engineer certainty. "He's gone." She stepped away from the mirror, crossing the pine plank floor that suddenly creaked too loudly, and pushed open the anteroom door. 40 faces turned toward her. Some sympathetic, some avid for drama. Silas Wayne rose, buttoned his jacket, and regarded her the way surveyors regard crumbling seawalls, calculating forces. She was halfway down the aisle when she realized she had no script beyond "Don't faint." She reached the rail dividing chancel from nave. "Friends," she began, throat working, "there's been an unexpected change in the schedule." A bubble of laughter rose in her own ears, delirium, maybe. Before she could shape the next sentence, a new voice answered, quiet but amplified by the chapel's perfect acoustics. "I can rectify the schedule," Silas Wayne said. Gasps rustled like palmetto fronds in hurricane-edge winds. Silas stepped out from the pew, his height and charcoal suit slicing through speculation. He stopped 2 arms' lengths from her, speaking not softly but deliberately. Miss Laverne, you deserve a partner who matches your reliability. I apologize for the abruptness, but I am available. He turned to the minister. If the license can be lawfully amended, I will stand in. Tori's heart slammed against bodice stays. The chapel spun, a compass losing north. Somewhere behind her, Magnolia whispered an imploring Victoria. Somewhere in front, the florist dropped a lily, it hit the floorboards like a pistol crack. Silas's gaze, steel gray, held no mockery. Only intent. She felt the congregation's gravity press, every stare a math vector summing to an unbearable force. Then, deep inside the storm of humiliation, a fierce, improbable calm rose. Engineers salvage. Urbanists improvise. And maybe architects of their own lives tear up blueprints when hurricanes rewrite the shoreline. Tori faced the minister. Do we have time to file an amended certificate before the tide pushes the aisle underwater? The minister, flushed, bewildered, glanced at his watch. 22 minutes, if our notary is willing. She is, said a voice, Mrs. Wilder, a retired judge and notary public, sliding her reading glasses onto her nose with the relish of someone offered front-row seats to history. Pens materialized. Silas produced a fountain pen engraved with city skyline silhouettes. Tori realized her own hand was steady as she signed Victoria May Laverne beside Silas Morgan Wayne on the emergency-issued license. The ring. Silas removed both platinum cuff links, Art Deco rectangles he joked were portable skyline pieces, at their first meeting, and twisted one free of its mechanism, revealing a plain circular stud. It fits, he said, sliding the cool metal onto her finger. Shock fizzed like champagne up her arm. The organist, pale but professional, caught Silas's slight nod and launched into All Creatures of Our God and King. The melody soared, pelicans outside startled into flight. Guests stumbled to their feet, Magnolia swayed but Darcy steadied her. Silas offered his elbow. Tori placed her converse-clad foot on the aisle runner and felt, astonishingly, the chapel's tilt correct, pilings settling into mud as solid as bedrock. Ahead, the altar glowed in tide-filtered light. Behind, the sea rolled on, indifferent witness to architecture, disaster, and surprise rebuilds. She took the first step with the certainty of a woman who lays foundations for a living, and who, in the exact middle of catastrophe, has chosen to blueprint something daringly new. The chapel door had scarcely thudded shut behind the last bewildered guest when the island's weather decided to rehearse its own coup. Sheets of silver rain hammered the roof, sucking the daylight from every oyster shell window and replacing it with a low thunderous growl that rattled the hymnals. Tori stood beneath the chancel arch feeling the tremor of it in the floorboards, as if the entire building were a drum and some enormous hand had begun to tap out an unfamiliar rhythm. Silas was already shrugging out of his suit jacket, charcoal wool now stippled with rain from the dash he'd made to the parking loop to instruct drivers, and settling it across her bare shoulders. The fabric smelled of cedar and the faint ozone of desert air fresheners. She registered the absurdity that this, of all things, would be her first sensory memory of marriage. He asked if she was cold. She realized then that she wasn't shivering from the weather but from a surge of bioadrenaline that made her fingertips fizz and her jaw lock. Darcy barreled up the aisle trailing a train of damp organza. The caterer wants to know if we're still doing the reception. Your mother's negotiating with a storm front. Chester's aunt is threatening to faint for the third time. She drew a breath when she saw the jacket on Tori's shoulders, then said, in the same tone she used when the hydraulic pile driver at last year's pier renovation jammed halfway through the pilings, okay. New plan. A new plan was something Tori understood. She lifted the jacket collar and gathered the scattered threads of project manager voice. The clubhouse has backup generators. Tell the caterer to replate anything delicate and swing the buffet tables inside. Live music goes on the veranda if it's dry, if not, they set up in the gallery. We'll need umbrellas for the path. Darcy saluted and pivoted, heels skidding on pine. Silas watched her with a spark of reserved admiration. You draft contingencies quicker than most mayors, he murmured. She ignored the compliment and stalked down the aisle, lifting her skirt to avoid the puddles blooming at every pew door. Outside, brackish wind whipped marsh grass flat, and fat raindrops slapped the gravel in cannon-shot spurts. By the time the wedding party reached the old yacht club, the only shelter on the spit of land that wasn't an abandoned oyster cannery, guests were soaked and buzzing with an energy that hovered between scandal and giddiness. Word of Chester's vanishing act had already circulated, but opposing explanations ricocheted off every cedar-paneled wall. He'd eloped with a groomer, he'd been blackmailed by shrimping cartel loan sharks, or, the favorite, he'd fled because Silas Wayne had quietly bought the bride in a power play for coastal zoning concessions. None guessed the truth was simpler, stranger, and entirely Tory's to discover later. In the center of the lounge, under a ceiling fan that clicked like an old metronome, Magnolia Laverne stood beside a rowboat-turned gift table, face waxy beneath her fixed hostess smile. She looked at Tory's gardenia crown, now wilted, petals bruised by rain, and at Silas's cufflink ring flashing on her daughter's hand. For a moment Tory braced for maternal implosion, but Magnolia surprised her. She pressed two trembling fingers to Tory's cheek. "I always told you marriages built in storms test stronger." Her voice threatened to break but didn't. Then she stepped back, turned to Silas, and said, "I've seen you on Bloomberg. I hope your quarterly reports mention you can waltz." Without waiting, she gestured to the guitarist, who launched into a ragged coastal jazz standard. Somewhere between the second shrimpan grits canopy and the first bottle of Pet Nat popped by Darcy, conveniently repurposed from table champagne, the atmosphere tipped from chaos to carnival. Guests formed a line to sign the emergency marriage license that Judge Wilder displayed like a trophy on the bar. A cousin-in-law produced a Polaroid, each shot came out blurred by humidity, lending the proceedings a dreamlike haze. Tori found herself laughing, sharp barks at first, then unguarded peals, each time someone offered condolences and congratulations in the same breath. Silas moved through the crowd with the unruffled gait of a man negotiating city bonds, but she noticed tiny tells, the way he rotated his glass clockwise between sentences, the fractional delay before someone said "runaway vet" and he answered with unpracticed irony. When the band shifted to a slow number, he approached her again, stopping an arm's length away. "I'll ask permission before every comfort," he said quietly. "May I claim the first dance that is contractually mine?" Lightning lit the windowpanes. She understood that politely refusing would undercut the command she'd spent 2 hours projecting, yet agreeing meant stepping into a spotlight hotter than the Georgia sun. She gave a single nod. He offered his hand at chest height, no daring waist grab, and she set her calloused builder's palm into his. They danced, barely moving, shoe tips scudding the warped pine. Rain hammered the roof like brush snare work while the band's trumpet wept. Silas's hand was warm but light at her back. His breath smelled faintly of mint. Tori realized, with a start, that she had not shared bodily equilibrium with anyone in months, not since late-night blueprint sessions with Chester when they split cartons of sesame noodles over drafting tables. This dance was different, no leaning, no twining of fingers, yet a promise of steadiness radiated through their clasp like tempered steel. When the song ended, Darcy intercepted them with umbrellas. "Press trucks outside," she warned. "You can bail through the kitchen or make the statement." Silas looked at Tori, clearly deferring. The old Tori, master of risk mitigation, would have fled. But something in the crucible heat of humiliation mixed with exhilaration made her raise her chin. "We make a statement," she said. Darcy zipped away to choreograph. They stepped onto the flooded veranda where salty wind slapped Silas's hair across his forehead. Reporters leaned over the railing, cameras wrapped in plastic. The lead anchor shouted a question about spontaneous matrimony. Tori lifted a megaphone someone thrust into her hand, the club's sailing regatta relic. "Life is adaptive reuse," she announced. "Sometimes you salvage the structure you have and build something stronger." She angled the megaphone toward Silas. He added only 4 words, resonant in the watery dusk, "and you reinforce with trust." The cameras flashed, thunder rolled. In that bright strobe Tori glimpsed the uncertain silhouette of her future, raw timbers exposed to a storm yet somehow intact. She squeezed the cufflink ring, felt its square edges bite, and recognized that calamities could be engineered into cornerstones if caught early and cured with precision. Inside, waitstaff began boxing leftovers, and Magnolia organized carpools across the causeway. Silas approached with a phone raised. "Your wedding night transport," he said. On the screen a float plane bobbed against a Seattle pier, time-stamped for dawn Pacific time. Blue Grid Lab opens Monday. If you prefer annulment, I'll file by morning. If you choose to collaborate, professionally and, eventually otherwise, the plane seats too. Tori stared at the photo, the seaplane, the glassy inlet, a skyline pricked by cranes of construction. Every instinct screamed for deliberation, a Gantt chart of consequences. Instead she heard herself say, "Flight plans need weather clearance." He shook his head. "Forecast is clear." She surprised them both with a small, wry grin. "Then let's catch a tide on the far coast, Mr. Wayne." He exhaled as though releasing decades of retained breath. They parted to gather belongings. Before Tori re-entered the main hall, she glanced back at the marsh. The rain had softened into mist, and the dropping tide left glittering rivulets between exposed reeds, new pathways etched in silt, ready for anyone brave enough to chart them. 6 hours after the last guest's Uber fishtailed off the causeway, Tori found herself wedged into the co-pilot seat of a de Havilland turbine otter, hair still pinned with wilted gardenias, boots dripping saltwater onto the rudder pedals. Dawn pinked the edges of Puget Sound below like underpainting on a vast canvas. Silas, who had insisted on flying them himself, kept one hand feather light on the yoke while the other scrawled wind vectors on a notepad clipped to his thigh. He flew with a kind of mathematician's economy, no flourish, minimal chatter, each micro-adjustment pre-calculated, as though every gust were a line item on a ledger. Tori had slept perhaps 40 minutes in a Charleston airport lounge during the red-eye hop, adrenaline still brightened the margins of her vision. Rain had stopped but the Georgia humidity lingered on her skin, blending with the airplane's smell of avgas and metal fatigue. She told herself this was an inspection trip, nothing more. Blue Grid was the pilot lab for her modular ferry, tram hybrid, and time zones didn't wait for postponed honeymoons. Yet the memory of signing a marriage license with a man she scarcely knew sat in her chest like a live coal, equal parts heat and caution. Silas banked low over Lake Union, floats kissing the water with the softest thump Tori had ever felt in an aircraft. He taxied toward a small pier jutting from a reclaimed warehouse campus. Painted across corrugated siding in ocean blue letters, Blue Grid Urban Hydrolink. The pier crew wore beanies, coffee in gloved hands, and their surprise at the passengers' attire, the bride in rain-spattered satin, the CEO minus his cuff links, registered as quick eyebrow lifts before they snapped to professional welcomes. Inside, the lab smelled of cedar planks and ozonated water. Transparent floor panels revealed a tank where prototype hydrofoils bobbed, tethered to sensors. Engineers in hoodies peered up, startled to see their corporate chief escorting a woman dressed like an indie music album cover. Silas's voice cut through the murmurs. "Folks, this is Victoria Laverne, our new Director of Coastal Mobility Design. Effective immediately." Tori felt 30 pairs of eyes swing her way. She pulled her shoulders back, grateful for the armor of professional language. "Looking forward to iterative failure and market-scale victory," she said, hoping the joke landed. It did, a smatter of nerd laughter rose. Silas guided her to a glass conference cube cantilevered over the water. Inside waited a single item, a hard-covered notebook embossed with compass roses. "Project log," he said, handing it over. "And also a blank slice of narrative real estate for us." The us hovered, fragile as mica. Tori opened to page 1. In precise graphite the date, March 15th, one day after the chapel implosion. Beneath, only a heading, Design Passport 0001, Intertidal Lives. He left her to acclimate while he debriefed with department heads. Alone, she moved through the workspace, reading schematics taped to whiteboards, current predictions, ferry hull cross-sections, a table mapping carbon offsets to ticket prices. The raw ambition thrilled her. Blue Grid wanted to stitch city islands together through zero-emission foils that rose and fell with tide like living arteries. Exactly the sort of boundary pushing she'd fantasized about while patching Savannah's century-old sewer mains. Seaplane lag hit at 0930. A kindly intern produced a towel and company sweatshirt so she could swap out of ruined wedding satin in a restroom plastered with motivational quotes, fail early, float often. Hair unpinned, she looked like someone emerging from both storm and prom, but at least she looked like herself. By midday she was sketching a variable draft dock that could auto-level against tidal surges. Engineers clustered, asking if she'd relocate full-time. She offered non-committal noises. Her Savannah office still needed her signature on dozens of municipal contracts. Silas rejoined, carrying nutrient shake bottles he claimed counted as lunch. They stood overlooking the tank. "Will you stay the week?" he asked. "I have a city council vote on Tuesday," she reminded him. "After that, maybe." His expression read as a calculated risk assessment. "Then we maximize 72 hours. He proposed a sprint review of every system, plus a twilight test run on the prototype ferry. She agreed, stipulating 8 hours of sleep somewhere in the window. They worked until evening blurred the warehouse windows indigo. At 1700 hours the crew wheeled out the 30-foot foil, sleek hull, solar skin deck. Silas gestured for Tori to take the helm. She hesitated only a breath before stepping onto the bow. He powered up the battery banks, quiet hum rose. They glided into Lake Union, urban skyline igniting with sodium stars. As speed increased, the hydrofoils lifted hull from water, drag vanished. Tori laughed, a sound pulled from marrow. Wind shredded the day's tension from her muscles. Silas stood aft, arms braced on rail, watching her pilot. When she finally throttled down, breathless, he crossed to her. "First captain on record," he said. "May I log your name?" She nodded. He tapped into the console, then surprised her by adding a second line, "Crew, S. Wayne, capacity, learning pilot." She glanced up, humility softened the austere angles of his face. They docked under a canopy of industrial string lights. Staff dispersed, leaving them in silence broken only by slapping ropes. For a moment words failed. Then Tori asked the question that had throbbed all day, "Why did you really step forward yesterday?" He answered without blinking. "I weighed cost of inaction. A woman capable of rebuilding coastlines was about to be publicly fractured. I calculated I could offer structural rescue, maybe earn partnership. Self-interested, yes, but equally empirical. Rescue by acquisition." She folded arms. "Rescue by joint venture," he corrected. "Subject to ongoing consent." His jaw tightened. If consent withdraws, merger dissolves. The legalistic tenderness knocked the breath from her. "Blueprints evolve," she said finally. "We draft as we go." Night settled thickly. They returned to the office loft where temporary cots had been prepared. Separate rooms, Silas had ordered, one more signpost of respect. Before parting, he placed a small box on the console table. "Your cuff link." I had a jeweler smooth the edges. Inside, the square platinum stud had been reshaped into a perfect circle, engraving of city skyline now wrapping like an unbroken horizon. Tori turned it against the light, metal catching reflections of water and fluorescent tubes. "Skylines are loops," she mused. He bowed an engineer's bow, palms together as though sealing a contract. She lay awake that night on a camp mattress, listening to heater ducts tick. Rain began, faint drumming on the metal roof, Pacific, not Atlantic, but rhythmically similar enough to tug memory. In the dark she slipped the ring onto her finger, feeling its weight settle differently than it had in the chapel, a deliberately crafted instead of improvised geometry. She rotated it once, whispered into the echoing loft, preliminary design accepted. 3 sockets away, separated by aluminum studs, Silas wrote in the project notebook beneath his heading. Day 1. 0-hour acquisition avoided catastrophe beta, captain shows aptitude for tidal alignment. Hypothesis, partnership viable if built on iterative transparency. He paused, pen hovered, then added a line crossed lightly so ink barely bruised the page, desire index rising, monitor for bias. At dawn, gulls screamed over Lake Union. 2 sleepless pragmatists rose, each unaware the other had written private margins into the same shared ledger. Outside, low clouds burned pink, promising another day of construction. Neither dared call what they were doing romance, yet the steel skeleton of something like it had begun to ascend, bolted to flood-tested pilings, braced by equal parts caution and audacity, its first rivet set under a brand-new northern sky. Morning fog rolled off Lake Union like a pale tide and pressed itself against the warehouse windows until the city vanished, Seattle replaced by a ghost of itself. Torai stood barefoot on the mezzanine catwalk, a mug of scorched lab coffee warming her knuckles, and stared into the whiteness. Below, the tank pumps thrummed, somewhere a pneumatic wrench shrieked as technicians swapped a foil strut. She breathed in the mix of cedar and ionized water and told herself she was inhaling new ground, not thin air. By 7:30 the blue grid scrum board glowed with assigned cards. Prototype dock damper, T. Laverne. Sensor bus patch, S. Wayne. Silas had insisted on sharing the grunt work rather than hovering as financier. She found him crouched beside an open server rack, sleeves already rolled, coaxing a misbehaving fiber transceiver. Close up, the CEO polish fell away, in its place was a man whose knuckles were scratched from years of hobbyist soldering. Packet loss at the splice, she guessed. Only on the channel carrying hydrofoil pitch, he said, not looking up. If we launch with intermittent telemetry, insurance will detonate. She knelt, accepted the crimper he extended, and together they respliced the LC connectors. It felt startlingly domestic, 2 newlyweds wiring their first apartment, if apartments floated and cost $9 million. When the green link light steadied, he exhaled a soft triumphant note, half laugh, half breath. At 10 o'clock came the site safety briefing. OSHA consultant Ravenborn, a woman whose steel-gray pixie cut matched her clipboard, eyed Tori's cufflink ring while flipping pages. So Mrs. Wayne. Ms. Laverne, Tori corrected automatically, pulse flicking. Silas didn't flinch. Bourne continued, your mooring fingers need handrails or the city will kill permitting. Tori jotted notes, thinking how quickly nomenclature could cut skin. Afterward, Silas lingered beside a spool of hawser rope. If the surname offends your independence, we can file a hyphenation, he said quietly. She almost laughed. That's the least of the legal revisions I need to contemplate. The real shock was how swiftly the word Mrs. had scraped at her sense of self, a small indicator light signaling unresolved circuits. Around noon Darcy pinged from Savannah with news, the city council vote on her ferry easement had passed, unanimous, sympathy leveraged into efficiency. Tori practically levitated. She broke for the kitchenette, dug out celebratory Pop-Tarts from her bag, passed one to Silas like a treaty wafer. He stared at strawberry sprinkles as if they were alien spores, then bit in and conceded, better than my usual protein bar. The afternoon sprint turned manic. Tori's variable draft dock concept demanded a quick-and-dirty prototype. They commandeered a vacant pier slip 2 blocks away where derelict tugboats rusted. Using scrap steel tubes, inflatable fenders, and a stack of recycled conveyor rollers, they improvised a seasign platform that could ride a 3-foot tidal change. Engineers bet beers on whether it would sink. Tori, still in her wedding Converse, climbed aboard with a laser level and barked for ballast. Silas hauled sandbags, grinning like a camp counselor, until sweat darkened his collar. The platform survived, bobbing in equilibrium while Tex cheered and Silas clapped a muddy handprint onto Tori's shoulder in victory. Fog returned by twilight, thicker, syruping orange wharf lights into halos. They reconvened in the upper office to debrief. Tori's hair frizzed into wild copper arcs, Silas had grease on his cheek. They looked like storm survivors, and felt like conspirators. She perched on the edge of the drafting table, dangling her feet, while he updated the project notebook. Day 2. Variable dock functional at TRL 4. Co-captain demonstrates risk tolerance consistent with deep partnership. He handed her the pen. She added beneath. Doc survived 8-wave, 2 marital semantics turbulence. Further testing required. They both laughed, too loud, and the sound ricocheted off steel beams. Silence followed, charged. She noticed how his lashes cast shadows on cheekbones now smudged with grime. He noticed, perhaps, how the loose lab sweatshirt could not hide the line of her collarbone. A knock interrupted, a junior engineer returning Silas's phone. "Press call in 10, she said, then disappeared. Silas groaned isometrically. Investor update. They'll ask why the groom is MIA from Manhattan. Tori slid off the table, feet hitting concrete. Let them speculate. Mystery keeps markets volatile. But she touched his forearm, a gesture whose intimacy startled them both. I'll stay while you call. He dialed, she listened. On speaker a board member voice fired questions. Why Seattle? Why Fairy Tech? Why that marriage? Silas answered with equanimity until the director demanded to speak with Mrs. Wayne for confirmation of alignment. He glanced at Tori for consent. She weighed the ledger of privacy versus partnership and nodded. This is Victoria Laverne, she said into the mic. My alignment is conditional on transparent resource flow. Thus far, a strict support is exemplary. If that changes, I have exit routes. A pause, then the director chuckled dryly. Noted, Ms. Laverne. We like transactional clarity. Call ended. Silas exhaled. I suspect they like you a bit, too. Fear and like are cousins, she answered, heart still race-ticking. Both keep people attentive. Downstairs, engineers locked tool cabinets, laughter echoing. They were alone again. Rain began, gentle Pacific drizzle drumming skylights. Tori sensed a pivot point, slip back into parallel professionalism or step onto converging tracks. She surprised herself by choosing the latter. I'm exhausted, but hungry, she said. Know any place still open where dress codes allow oil stains? He considered. There's a 24-hour Taiwanese porridge spot on Aurora. Plastic stools, no questions. Perfect. She grabbed her windbreaker, he slung a rain shell over grease-splattered shirt. They trudged through the misty streetlights to his matte black electric Rover. The restaurant was a fluorescent cube smelling of rice starch and white pepper. They slid into a booth where laminated menus doubled as placemats. Tori ordered century egg porridge and soy-braised peanuts. Silas followed her lead. Conversation drifted from dock elastomer choices to the microhistory of municipal seawalls, then, finally, to the glaring question orbiting them. Will you go back to Savannah? He asked. My firm can run remote for a quarter, she said, stirring porridge. But I promised them a light rail vote in October. She felt the weight of two coasts tugging at opposite wrists. He nodded. Blue Grid's board meets in November to decide expansion. If you stay until then, we demonstrate pilot viability together. And after November, she pressed. He paused, spoon hovering. After November, we renegotiate the map. Together, if you choose. In his eyes she saw both blueprint grids and open ocean. Porridge steam fogged the greasy spoon's windowpane. She drew her fingertip across the condensation, sketching a simple icon, two interlocking circles over a wavy line, dock meets hull. He traced over hers, adding a small plus sign. Their linked reflections blurred. Back at the warehouse, she hesitated outside his door. He rested a hand on the knob of his, gaze searching. Good night, Victoria. She tested her own name on his tongue, that V crossing into something intimate. Good night, Silas. She went in, back against the closed door, pulse a drum. Sleep evaded, rain whispered on corrugated metal. She took the project notebook to the cot, flipped to a fresh page beneath the day's log and wrote. Unknowns: 1. Structural integrity of rapid marriage joint. 2. Load capacity for parallel ambitions. 3. Personal fault lines still unmapped. Then, beneath it. Preliminary finding: dock afloat, hull stable, weather advisory, hopeful. Across the hall, Silas updated his own margin, bias confirmed. Next step, request peer review from subject when timing right. The rain eased near dawn. In the gray hush, generators hummed, and Seattle's skyline re-emerged piece by glittering piece. Inside Blue Grid, two new partners dozed separately, unaware that the same slow smile, tired and incredulous, curved their mouths as dreams slid into that threshold where building plans and heart plans overlap. Outside, the prototype dock rose and fell with the tide, evidence that flexibility, not rigidity, keeps structures alive. Completely unaware of its symbolic burden, it kept floating, waiting for the next day's load, confident in the hands that had built it together. Tori awoke to the smell of solder flux and the buzz of her phone vibrating across the metal cot frame. Gray dawn seeped through the clerestory windows, washing the loft in a diffused glow that felt more underwater than atmospheric. She swung her feet over the edge, blinking at the unfamiliar caller ID, Savannah Animal Clinic. Chester. Instinct told her to ignore it, but curiosity pried. She accepted, voice low so it wouldn't carry across the thin wall. Victoria Laverne. A beat of silence, then his familiar drawl, frayed at the edges. Ms. Laverne. I heard, congrats, I guess. Look, the Chronicle's hounding me for a statement. I didn't talk, but they found the security footage of me leaving the chapel. They're spinning some story that your new husband poached you. Tori pinched the bridge of her nose, anger flaring at the gall of him. Chester, you poached yourself. If you want redemption, donate a week of free spay and neuter clinics. Otherwise, stay out of my news cycle. She ended the call and immediately blocked the number. Her pulse hammered, but oddly, the confrontation felt like clearing a clogged valve. Breathe in, release. Downstairs, Blue Grid's floor bustled despite the early hour. Today was the first full-scale harbor test, prototype ferry, variable draft dock, real passengers in the form of local officials hungry for green tech photo ops. Silas stood at the end of the gangway in black field jacket and jeans, briefing the team with the calm precision of a launch director. When he spotted Tori descending the stairs, his eyes sparkled with some private relief, as though her mere presence verified that the day's algorithms were sound. She joined him at the dock edge. Lake Union, freed from fog, reflected cranes and condo glass in perfect symmetry. The ferry, christened Foil 1 in vinyl letters Tori had applied herself, idled with a low electric hum. Silas handed her a tablet. Live ballast telemetry. You run ops, I'll play deckhand. She raised an eyebrow. CEO on rope duty? I prefer the term chief line engineer, he said, grin quick as a flashbulb. The first VIP group, city councilors in Patagonia vests, arrived, cameras trailing. Tori greeted them, keeping introductions crisp. They stepped aboard, she watched the draft sensors dip, then rebound as the hydrofoils compensated. Perfect. The ferry nosed away from the slip, gliding onto open water like a skate on ice. Applause broke out, camera shutters clicked. 5 minutes into the tour, a red alert pulsed on Tori's screen, starboard foil actuator lag. Not catastrophic, but if lag increased, the vessel could list on hydrolift. She hailed Silas on intercom, he appeared from below deck, grease already streaking his knuckles. Servo overheat, he said, breath short. Manual cool flush should reset. Can you patch it underway? He gave a curt nod and vanished below again. Tori kept the VIPs occupied, spinning wind resistance facts while her stomach coiled. She caught Lyra and Orion on the shoreline, filming with a drone. They begged to watch the test from a safe berth. Their miniature faces beamed on her phone screen, oblivious to actuator warnings. Minutes stretched. The lag value ticked higher, flirting with the abort threshold. Just as she prepared to radio a return order, Silas emerged, hair damp, thumbs up raised. Telemetry snapped back to nominal. She exhaled so hard a councilwoman glanced at her. Tori smiled, pivoted the conversation to carbon offsets. Back at the dock, disembarkation proceeded with obligatory ribbon-cutting photos. A reporter lobbed the first personal question, Ms. Laverne, some say this marriage was a strategic merger. Care to comment on mixing romance and infrastructure? Flash bulbs popped. Tori opened her mouth, then Silas stepped beside her. Blue Grid merges expertise, not headlines, he said, voice steady. Victoria's design saved us $24 million in dredging. My investment saved her 3 years of permitting. The marriage just means meetings start on time. Laughter rippled, tension diffused. Tori shot him a grateful side eye. He answered with a fractional dip of his chin, an unspoken we make a good tag team. Late afternoon, the crew debriefed in the mezzanine with cans of blackberry seltzer. The servo failure traced back to a faulty coolant O-ring, easy fix before tomorrow's demonstration to state lawmakers. Silas clinked cans with technicians, giving credit Tori knew was half hers. She watched him through the glass wall, the Billionaire fitting seamlessly among engineers, sleeves still stained. Something unlocked in her chest, respect rooted deeper than adrenaline camaraderie. She found him later on the roof deck, twilight bruising the horizon. He leaned against the rail, city lights flickering on like a slow neural network. He didn't turn when she approached. You saved the test run, she said. He shrugged. You designed a dock that didn't drown politicians while I bled a coolant line. Call it even. She laughed, soft, unworried. Silence pooled, comfortable. The humid air smelled faintly of lake water and solder. I spoke to Chester, she admitted. Silas stiffened. Problem? No, she said. Closed chapter. She traced the ring, now bright from a jeweler's polish, with her thumb. I'm learning demolition is part of building. Wind lifted a strand of her hair, he tucked it behind her ear with an engineer's delicacy, fingertips barely brushing skin. Reckon we pour new footings, then, he murmured. She didn't pull away. Instead she angled toward him, their shoulders aligning like adjoining beams. Below, foil 1 rocked gently, tether lines squeaking, a lullaby for fabricators. Tori slid a hand into his and felt the earlier coil in her stomach unfurl into something quietly tensile, like cable ready to bear weight. Tomorrow's lawmakers will ask about scalability, she said, voice a shade husky. I'll need your cost curves. They're your cost curves now. He squeezed her hand. Everything structural, shared load. The lake absorbed city noise until only their mingled breathing remained. She rested her head against his shoulder and watched a drone, Orion's, ascend, lights blinking Morse on a pale canvas of sky. It caught their silhouette on the roof, 2 figures, one outline, brace and girder. Somewhere in the warehouse, the project notebook waited for fresh margins, but tonight data could rest. Structures, after all, gain strength in stillness between stress tests. When the drone dipped and zipped home, Tori and Silas descended the stairs side by side, boots echoing in sync. The actuator O-ring would be replaced, media would swirl, Blue Grid's fate would battle budget committees. But each challenge felt suddenly, undeniably, tractable, because 2 engineers had decided to shoulder the tensile load together. In the calculus of resilient design, that made all the difference, rain boomed on the corrugated roof like a million rivets from an angry sky, an October atmospheric river barreling off the Pacific that threatened to drown Blue Grid's carefully orchestrated, State Day, demonstration before it began. Tori had slept on a cot outside the electronics lab again. She woke to the smell of wet plywood and the low battery whine of her tablet, whose screen still displayed the night's final spreadsheet, projected passenger throughput versus legislative funding bans. She padded to the mezzanine rail. Below, engineers hurried through puddles in yellow slickers, sealing pelican cases and lashing tool carts to wall brackets. The prototype ferry bobbed violently against its fenders, carbon fiber foils flexing like anxious wings. Lightning strobed, revealing Silas already on the dock, hair pasted to his forehead, shouting instructions into a walkie. She admired the way he moved, no executive detachment, just a tall, soaked man checking mooring knots with his own hands. She took the express ladder and hit the concrete running. Rain slapped her cheeks cold and clean. Forecast said a quarter inch, she yelled over the gale. Atmospheric river shifted south at 3 o'clock, Silas shouted back. If this keeps up, we can't risk legislators on the water. From the warehouse door, Ravenborn appeared, umbrella useless in the sideways sheets. A dock cleat ripped out, we're losing tension on the starboard line. Tori's stomach dipped. If the ferry broke loose it could shear the new variable draft dock in half and bankrupt 6 months of goodwill. She scanned the whitecapping chop, calculating loads the way most people counted heartbeats. We need a storm spread anchoring, triangle the ferry to the bulkhead. Silas keyed the walkie. Diego, Page, drop secondary lines to bulkhead south post. Use the orange double braid. Tori sprinted to the storage cage, hauling out an 8-foot aluminum cleat plate meant for a yet-to-be-installed pier. She and Silas manhandled it down the slick ramp, boots skating on algae. Water swirled above their ankles. They set the plate, drilled tap bolts with a cordless driver that sparked each time the bit metal. Thunder answered like a grumpy superintendent. That'll hold, Silas grunted, voice right in her ear because the wind stole anything softer. But the real threat arrived in a push notification on her watch, urgent, electrical grid emergency, Seattle City Light. The storm had toppled a substation to the north, rolling blackouts imminent. If power at the lab died, the ferry's bilge pumps and dock ballast controllers would fail within minutes. Tori swore. Generators? Not commissioned till next week, Silas said. But, he narrowed his eyes toward the prototype ferry. Its deck solar skin and battery banks could, in theory, backfeed shore power. No one had ever attempted it outside simulation. She saw the same calculation bloom behind his eyes. We island the warehouse off the grid, she said. You reroute through the DC bus. I design, you wire, he answered. While Bourne diverted workers into a human chain relaying cable reels, Silas vanished below deck of Foil 1 to expose the battery junction box. Tori threw the master breaker in the warehouse, slicing them off municipal power with a thunk that silenced every non-UPS humming thing. Emergency exit signs glowed dim orange. In the dark she and a junior tech unspooled thick DC leads across the dock, rain turning them into black snakes. A forklift battery was commandeered for jumpstart current. Lightning flicked again, fast snapshot of Silas's lean figure knee-deep in the machinery pit, spanner clenched in teeth, tightening lugs. Ready to energize in 90 seconds, he called. She crouched by the load center, heart skittering like wind-tossed driftwood. One by one, she threw transfer switches the size of paperback novels. Sparks popped, the smell of ozone bloomed. LED strips along the ceiling flickered, then steadied to life. Fans whirred. Somewhere, the ballast pumps kicked back in with a victorious gurgle. Bourne clapped once, breath billowing white. Systems nominal. Tori slumped against the panel, rainwater streaming off her hood. Across the dock Silas emerged, soaked, triumphant, as if born from the storm. Their eyes locked, a silent exchange, crisis mitigated, proof of concept, both technological and relational. A horn honked from the access road. 3 state legislators stepped gingerly from an SUV, umbrellas inside out in the gale. Tori wiped water from her face, squared her shoulders, and marched up the pier to greet them. Welcome to Blue Grid, she called above the wind. We're currently demonstrating emergency microgrid resilience, live. Would you like a closer look? The trio stared, half awed, half terrified. One, a portly man in a drenched moleskin coat, ventured, "Is it safe?" Silas appeared at Tori's side like a tall thunder sprite. "Safer than any coastal city that doesn't modernize," he said smoothly. "Follow us." Inside, the lawmakers shivered while engineers displayed real-time dashboards, ferry batteries feeding 312 kilowatts into the warehouse, dock ballast run by algorithms adjusting for storm surge. A generator salesman taken hostage by spectacle whispered to a colleague, "This is the future of emergency infrastructure." The phrase floated, pregnant with budgetary implication. When the tour ended, Tori escorted the officials back to their car, rain easing into a moderate drizzle. As taillights disappeared, her adrenaline finally ebbed, leaving trembling limbs. Silas wrapped a blanket from the break room around her shoulders. "First time I've seen you doubt the math," he teased softly. She managed a laugh that felt half-sobbing. "First time I've wired a $500 million ferry into a building on a hunch." "A proof point worth a semester of hearings," he replied. His hand found hers beneath the blanket, fingers lacing, permission asked and received in a single squeeze. Back upstairs the crew buzzed, high on survival victory. Bourne signed off on a temporary occupancy waiver, impressed beyond professional stoicism. "Never seen a CEO who knows NEMA classifications by heart," she told Silas. "Or a bride in sneakers with IEC breaker etiquette," she told Tori. They grinned at each other like co-defendants. Night fell, the atmospheric river sluiced eastward. The battery still hummed its low hymn of stored sunlight, now powering Klieg lights and coffee urns. In the quiet corner of the mezzanine, Tori opened the project notebook to a fresh page. Day 3. Stress test alpha, dock 100%, ferry at grid, partnership voltage stable. Additional note, emotional capacitance increasing under load. Silas, reading over her shoulder, took the pen and added beneath. Recommendation, schedule preventive maintenance, shared dinner, dry clothes, 8 hours sleep in adjacent but optional quarters. She elbowed him gently. Engineer's romance. He shrugged, rainwater finally drying in his hair. Resilient systems require deliberate downtime. They left the humming lab, slipped into the city's wet neon. The Korean barbecue joint on Dexter still had power. They commandeered a booth, steam clouding the window as short rib sizzled. Conversation drifted from copper lug ratings to childhood hurricane memories, then, naturally, to marriage, its legal tangles, its emotional dead reckoning. Tori confessed she'd blocked Chester's number that morning. Silas admitted he'd emailed his board authorizing legal counsel to separate his personal marital status from a strict stock disclosures. Transparency, he said, raising a soju glass. She clinked hers. Resilience, she answered. The toast felt less like a slogan, more like an oath. After midnight they walked back across a street glossy as obsidian. Tori's ring, formerly a cuff link, caught the street lamp glow, circle complete. She lifted it, considered. This ring started as an improvisation, she murmured. Today proved improvisations can hold. Silas slipped his hand around hers. Then let's keep forging. Controlled heat, precise quench. A gust scented with cedar swept the block. She leaned into him, accepting the warmth. Blue grid sign flickered ahead, powered by ferry batteries still feeding the dream. In the shelter of that glow they paused, forehead to forehead, and let the urgency of the day exhale into something quieter. No thunder, no cameras, only two builders mapping a joint load path through storm after storm, blueprinting a future one crisis-tempered rivet at a time. Dawn crept in sullen and sheep cloud gray, as if the sky itself were hungover from yesterday's atmospheric deluge. Inside Blue Grid the after-action board glowed with a new column of sticky notes, storm lessons. Tori added 2 before coffee, route redundant battery feeds through ceiling conduit and stock wetsuits in server cage. Across the table Silas scribbled establish governor hotline for microgrid override. They barely had time to pin the notes before Rena, the avionics turned marine software lead, rushed in waving a tablet. Canadian press picked up our Ferrias power plant hack, front page of the Globe and Mail. Now 3 provincial utilities are asking for briefings. Her grin split into mischief. They assume the married genius rumor is real currency. Tori exchanged a glance with Silas. Yesterday's hand-holding on the dock had not gone unnoticed. A drone photo, probably Orion's, circulated online, captioned "Storm-forged newlyweds tamed the grid." Silas massaged the bridge of his nose. "We'd better drive the narrative before it drives us." Before they could schedule a comms session, Perez pinged in from Savannah. The city wanted Tori to beam into council chambers, tonight, to explain how Blue Grid's emergency microgrid could translate to hurricane-prone Georgia ports. The timeline left precisely 0 slack. Split forces, Silas decided. "You prep Savannah. I'll corral the Canadians." Tori hesitated. Even with macropilot success, her brain twitched at leaving the Seattle testbed in someone else's hands. He seemed to read the flicker. "I can run triage. The servo glitch is cleared. Worst case I swap the whole actuator," he said. Then, in lower voice, "This is your hometown pitch, Vic. They need to see your face, not a stand-in." She nodded. "But one condition. Live link while I present, so you can inject data if council drifts." "Done." He produced a lanyard badge labeled visitor and replaced the paper with a scribbled co-founder. He clipped it to her collar. The gesture hummed like low-voltage trust. By mid-morning Tori had commandeered a quiet glass pod, turned it into Savannah War Room. Darcy appeared on screen like caffeine incarnate, pushing her glasses up as she rapid-fired committee gossip. "One counselor wants proof your ferry batteries survive saltwater immersion. Another is worried your sudden elegant husband signals out-of-state takeover." Tori rolled her eyes. "Tell him we're keeping property taxes local." She drafted a slide deck crafter to kill with kindness, cost curves, storm grid case study, still frames of counselors yesterday swooning safe and dry while half the city blacked out. Silas patched in a real-time readout of Lake Union power backfeed. Last slide, a rendering of Savannah's tidal marshes laced with floating tram stops, lit by solar-backed batteries shaped like osprey nests. She titled it, "Wetlands Transit, Protecting What Holds Us Up." While graphs loaded, curiosity gnawed. What exactly was Silas's endgame with Canada? She tapped into Engineering Channel, glimpsed him in a CONF room, sleeves rolled, talking animatedly to 2 officials in French-accented English. He drew force vectors in the air, occasionally pointing to a 3D simulation of ferries hopping across Vancouver in winter gloom. Blue lines turned green as load shed to grid. Officials nodded vigorously. Their eyes met through their respective cameras. He flashed a thumbs up. Something warm bloomed in her chest, not the heat of crisis, but the sluicegate feeling of letting someone else shoulder half without double-checking the bolts. Evening in Seattle meant post-midnight in Savannah, but council insisted on primetime slot. At 1900 hours Tori stepped onto Blue Grid's small sound stage, ring lights framing her like a stern lighthouse keeper. Behind her the maintenance crew had artfully draped coiled ropes and a scale model of Foil 1. In her earbuds Darcy counted down. "Councilmember Rayburn, you're muted," Darcy's voice hissed. An unmute click, a grainy video feed of Savannah City Hall filled the monitor. The chamber looked half empty, late hour, but live streams and journalists would amplify every syllable. Tori launched. Within 3 slides she felt the familiar click of audience lean in. Questions volleyed, battery fire risks, insurance, gator hazards. She deflected with calm, even coaxed laughter by quipping that Georgia alligators were smart enough to hitch rides, not chew cables. When the skeptical counselor raised the interstate takeover specter, Silas's remote window blinked awake. "Counselor," he said, voice deep, steady. "Astrix does not seek ownership. We license tech at cost and step back. Governance belongs to local stewards, which is why I'm married to one. Tori's heart jerked. Was this PR flourish or statement of feeling? The chamber murmured. She swallowed. The risk to rebut him could dilute authority. She chose a higher line. What Mr. Wayne means is partnership isn't paperwork, it's accountability. Savannah controls, Blue Grid supports. Light applause. Slide deck end. Vote queued instantly. Darcy's machinations had trimmed bureaucracy. 5 yes, 1 abstain. Motion passed, pilot funding unlocked. Adrenaline drained, Tori sagged in her chair, camera off. Silas appeared on her side of the screen. You're luminous under pressure, he said. And you're handy French. She smiled. We're approved. I booked a flight to Georgia next week, he replied. Board wants to see the Marsh plan on site. Anne, he hesitated, I'd like to see your home Marsh, the one behind your parents' place. The invitation felt intimate as lips. It's muddy, buggy, smells like pluff, she warned. Then I'll bring proper boots. Night deepened over Lake Union. Workers filtered out, alarms armed themselves. Tori walked the dim aisle between tool benches, still wearing the co-founder badge. Silas waited by the water-level door, city lights reflecting on his drenched shoes from the previous day. You're still here, she said. You, too. Those 2 words carried layers. I stay when storms hit, I'll stay again. She stepped closer. I said marriage is accountability. That goes both ways, she murmured. I choose to remain accountable, Silas. He exhaled, like a man decompressing from high pressure far below safe depth. Slowly, as if giving her time to revise, he brushed fingertips across her rain-frizzed hair, then cupped her jaw. She rose onto Converse toes and kissed him. Not crisis-born, but deliberate, measured, like a load test that proves beyond design threshold. The room smelled of steel and brackish water. Somewhere, delayed thunder rolled. When they parted, he rested his forehead to hers. Peer review complete, he whispered. She laughed, sudden and soft. Results statistically significant. They left the bay door open as they walked upstairs, letting cool night air sweep through and carry away leftover solder fumes. Above the mezzanine exit hung the safety board on which Raven Bourne had earlier written in fat green marker, Days Without Lost Time Accidents 0001. Tori flipped the 1 to 2. Progress, however incremental, holds. The Savannah answered their return with a briny October breeze and the slow, percussive clack of palm fronds against wrought iron balconies. The flight from Seattle had folded space in Tori's mind. One morning she was sealing microgrid contracts over oat milk lattes, the next she was steering a rental SUV across the Talmadge Bridge while marsh grass shimmered bronze beneath the sun. Silas sat in the passenger seat, a rolled-up topo map between his knees and 3 time zones of red-eye fatigue in his eyes, yet he studied every tidal slough as though the water itself were a feasibility study. They drove first to Magnolia Laverne's cottage on Isle of Hope, a weather-beaten shotgun with a dock that looked stitched to the marsh by spider silk. Magnolia opened the screen door before the engine shut off, flour on her hands. She'd baked apology biscuits, she confessed, in case the groom who had actually shown up wanted proper Southern thanks. Silas accepted the plate solemnly, though his New York palate had never met buttermilk tang quite so pure. 1 bite, and he looked both humbled and in danger of becoming a biscuit evangelist. Over lunch on the screened porch, plans unfurled, Blue Grid Savannah pilot would install 3 variable draft docks along the Wilmington River, interlacing the new ferries with Tori's long-fought light rail stop. Silas fielded Magnolia's shrewd questions about local labor, insisting every contract include apprentice quotas for Savannah Technical College. By the time cicadas swelled to afternoon volume, Magnolia leaned across the table and patted his wrist. You build communities, not just platforms, she said. I worried my daughter had made a rebound of steel and numbers, but you're made of river mud too, seems like. That night they stayed in adjoining childhood bedrooms, Tori's walls still pinned with high school science fair ribbons and faded concert posters. Silas texted from across the hall, "Your mother asked if I play church softball. Is that code for something?" Tori stifled laughter under a quilt older than both of them. "It means she's pricing your reflexes. Duck if she lobs a curveball at breakfast." Morning brought them to City Hall for the formal signing ceremony. The council chamber smelled of old pine and fresh political capital. Cameras tracked Tori as she clicked through final blueprints, foils, docs, store microgrid contingencies. When she yielded the podium, Silas strode up in a linen suit 3 shades lighter than the damp heat. He spoke for exactly 90 seconds, citing projected transformer damage avoidance and tourism upticks, then ceded the floor with the understatement of a man who knows dollars follow vision, not volume. The vote to ratify the public-private partnership passed 7-0, even the abstainer from months ago raised a grin. Afterward, reporters swarmed the marble steps. One pointedly asked if their whirlwind marriage would survive the grind of coastal bureaucracy. Tori glanced at Silas, sun glancing off her ring. He answered first. "We file maintenance schedules on everything we build," he said. "This partnership, that's daily upkeep. We welcome inspections." His hand brushed the small of her back, nothing proprietary, just a silent pledge to reinforce. Work accelerated. Pilings were bored, floating modules craned in. The marsh hummed with diesel and gulls. Tori's Converse boots sank into pluff mud as she chalk-lined dock elevations beside crews in neon vests. Silas spent mornings in county permit trailers, afternoons elbow-deep in hydraulic piston prototypes, evenings back at the cottage drafting capital stack diagrams Magnolia pretended not to read over his shoulder. One late weekend, during a slack tide, Tori led him down her parents' dock. Spanish moss stirred above, fiddler crabs retreated in skittering waves. At the pier's furthest planks, she revealed a weathered tackle box. Inside lay the ring Silas had first fashioned from his cuff link, metal now polished by weeks of wear but still plainly improvised. Beside it sat a second band, brushed titanium inlaid with reclaimed heart pine slivers salvaged from an 1890 River Wharf piling, wood that had endured countless floods, still fragrant with resin. "I had our metals guy mill it from leftover tramrail stock," she explained, a nervous tilt to her smile. "Steel for strength, pine for place." Silas turned the ring, understanding blooming across his features. "Will you become Mrs. Laverne Wayne, Director of Coastal Mobility, Co-Architect of Resilient Cities?" She shook her head. "I'll remain Victoria Laverne, wearer of mud boots, partner to Silas Wayne, titles flexible, load-bearing constant. What do you say we pour a second foundation ceremony? Not public this time. Just marsh, wind, and a couple of restless engineers." He didn't answer with words. He slipped the band onto her finger beside the circle of platinum skyline, 2 rings now, one born of crisis, one of deliberation, clinking softly. Magnolia officiated at dusk, standing barefoot on the end of the dock with a Bible in one hand and a tide table in the other, because timing was a sacrament in this family. Darcy streamed the vows to Blue Grid Seattle crew, who toasted with cans of blackberry seltzer until it frothed. The vows were short, promises to maintain redundancy, to share the risk matrix, to inspect for hairline cracks before they widened. When Magnolia pronounced them married again, lightning flickered far upriver, but no thunder followed. The storm was moving offshore. Tori dipped a hand into the creek's dark water, cool silk against her skin, then pressed her palm to Silas's heart. "We build here next," she said, meaning the wild muscle beneath ribs. He covered her hand with his. Weeks later, Foil 1 sliced through Savannah's morning mist on its inaugural commuter run, gliding past white egrets and startled fishermen. On the dock, Tori called out data, draft centimeters, passenger counts, while Silas relayed battery curves to a tablet. Cheering commuters snapped photos, hashtags already blooming. From Seattle to Vancouver to Quebec, utility execs studied the feed. Blue Grid shares ticked up, but Silas hardly noticed. He was busy watching Tori's face, alight with the glow of suspension foil spray and the future lifting under its own quietly humming power. He thought of the chapel, rain, Gardenius, the catastrophic text message that had appended her orbit and redirected his. Disruption, he realized, was just another word for new starting coordinates. And sometimes the wildest trajectories, architect and CEO, runaway groom and fortuitous rescue, resolved into the most stable of orbits, provided every component kept its maintenance schedule and both partners remembered that even storm-tested structures need sunlit days to cure. The ferry slowed, air cushioning to a stop beside the variable draft dock that rose and fell like a breathing lung. Passengers applauded. Torai marked a check on her clipboard, first revenue trip complete. Silas extended a hand to steady her over the gap. She took it, and together they stepped ashore as a single system, engineered for redundancy, optimized for resilience, and fully commissioned for the long voyage ahead.